As you know, this is the final week of our program, and even though I've been doing this for several weeks now, I'm going to remind you, if you would, to turn off your cell phones. That'd be great. Thank you so much. And I will remind you as well that there is a reception following the reading tonight across the green and Case College Center in the spa. This evening, I will introduce Binnie Kirschenbaum, and then after her reading, Catherine Pond, who is a student of Mark Strand's in the MFA program at Columbia and has long been an assistant at the Writers Institute, will introduce Mark Strand. In his book on the subject, Henri Bergson wrote that one good definition of comedy is watching people dancing to music through a window without our being able to hear their music. To which I think we can say, good. And then maybe we don't know that this will do. Certainly it doesn't do for the fiction of Binnie Kirschenbaum, who is much of the time a comic writer. For one thing, in Bergson's version of comedy, there is a watcher outside the window looking in on things, whereas in Binnie's fiction, we never feel quite like watchers. And we are never quite deprived of the music the characters dance to. Binnie doesn't permit detachment. She insists that we mix and mingle and burn and weep and carry on. Her characters, even those most extravagantly eccentric or self-destructive, are our familiars. When we laugh at them and their foibles, it is not the Olympian laughter of the gods we laugh, but the laughter through tears of persons who know themselves to be susceptible to foolishness and delusion and damage. Of course, the word comic only begins to get at what we love in the work of Binnie Kirschenbaum. Often, in responding to her work, other writers note that she can be simultaneously funny and mournful, unsentimental and poignant, lighthearted and haunted, giddy and grief-laden. Junot Diaz wrote of her book, Hester Among the Ruins, presses against your heart the way old lovers do. And that seems to me an especially astute attempt to get at what is really distinctive in all of Binnie's work. I'm not sure exactly how old lovers press against your heart, or if they do, but there is, in Binnie, some sharply felt sense that in everything you do, you can also feel the presence of something else, something apparently past and done with, but never quite gone. Her books convey layers of feelings, each thought, no matter how immediate, referring also to some complex of memories that inevitably take you back, so that the comedy often has to do with your belief that you live utterly in the present, even while your experience is shaped by everything that you carry around in your head and in your bloodstream, whether you know it or not. People in Binnie tell themselves, as one character has it, that the truth is in the experiment, which translate to, you just have to jump right in and let stuff play out as it will. But the novels show us that each new experiment will be affected by all of the weird baggage we carry with us into our present encounters. Readers of Binnie's fiction know that the comedy is located not merely in single lines or passages, but in the anarchic unfolding of the sprawling worlds she creates. And yet always there are the great lines and passages, none of them throwaways, none of them merely clever or smart, though without the narrative context you might well be forgiven for simply delighting in each delectable spritz that Binnie provides. Delighting, I'll give you just a few examples. In The German Professor, a formidable woman with a bosom like a dining room table. Or the tedious guidebook to the city of Heidelberg, in which every fart and belch got a mention from the year 800 right up until 1933, when somehow the chronology stopped. Or the crowd assembled for the opening of a pizza parlor, swarming like maggots. Or the sad apartment of a lonely young man with an armchair the color of liverwurst, and the blanket which had once been a banquet for moths. Or the guy, informed that his wife is pregnant, who says, "Really? I hit a home run, really?" And is then said to have equated this with his other athletic accomplishments, as if he had placed first in a competition of darts. Of course, there is comedy in novels that don't elicit actual laughs and don't contain a relentless skein of great lines, but Binney's comic fiction gives us ever so many kinds of comic pleasure, including the kind that provokes delight in us when idiocy is exposed, or when varieties of contemporary political correctness are made to seem hopelessly dull and stupid. Once upon a time, it was felt that comedy could not allow for compassion, which was by definition the enemy of laughter. But Binney can do laughter and compassion, shtick and romance in the same breath. Her gift for mockery and satire, an aspect of her larger gift for seeing us all as belonging to the same human community, vulnerable, ridiculous, pathetic, and amusing. Binney Kirschenbaum.
Bob, you're putting that online now, right? It's going to be everywhere. Thank you. Usually I just jump in and read from a book or recently out or a work in progress. And there's nothing out new, and in progress is a little sketchy as well. So I've decided to take a cue from the poets, and I'm going to read some bits and pieces of things, but with a reason and with a story that needs to be told for it to make any sense at all. Well, no, it would make sense anyway. I'm babbling, sorry. Last year was the first year I was back in the classroom after I had been chairing for 4 years and didn't teach. And so it was a new experience yet again to be teaching students. And I had several students in that class who were writing novels that had teenage or children as narrators or protagonists. And my problem with their work was that it sounded like children or teenagers, and it ended up sounding like young adult work because we were so far into being a teenager or a child, and it wasn't being written for adults the way it should have been. And I was a little impatient with that, and I sort of said, I do not want to be locked in a room for 300 pages with a child. And we had many talks about this, and I kept insisting, grown-up writers do not say my mom and my dad. We say my mother and my father. And somehow it wasn't getting through. But it was okay. We learned a little bit and we moved forward. But the next semester, I had some different batch of students who were writing either from the points of view of children or had children as protagonists that were spectacular. Really, really great work, which is absolutely wonderful. But it had come to my attention that there was somebody who was supposed to be in my class who asked for a transfer because she was writing something from the point of view of an 11-year-old, and she was told that I don't allow that. And so she didn't want to be in my class. And I had heard this. And then I had these students who were writing all this really great stuff that was about children and adolescents. And so at one point I asked, and I said, was there some sort of rumor or something going around that you can't write about children with me? And they all nodded their heads yes, and told me how really scared they were to be in my class. The one who had a 6-year-old protagonist told me she was absolutely terrified and didn't know what to do and thought maybe she should start writing something brand new because everybody knew and the word was out there that I do not let people write about children and I do not like children. And there are no child and no teenager allowed in my classroom. And I was kind of a little surprised at that. And I said, really? And they said, oh, yeah, absolutely. No children, no teenagers. And then one young woman raised her hand and she said, and dogs. Now, the children and the teenagers, I understand. The dogs, I love dogs. You want my dogs? I know. So anyway, with that in mind, I decided I was going to read some work of mine that have children, narrators, or protagonists. And and again, like the poets, little bits and pieces from some different work. And then I have a couple of short pieces from the work that's in progress, in which the pieces I'm going to read from that are from the protagonist's point of view as a child, though most of the book, she is an adult, and there's only those sort of flashbacks, because I only allow myself 12 pages of children in any one. So I think the first little piece that I will read is from my last novel, which is The Scenic Route, and this one has children and a dog. During the time when Sean Ryan, bona fide, twisted, sicko fuck, lived among us on Leland Road, hating him was something like boosterism in our neighborhood, the way it brought everyone together. A Saturday afternoon late in spring when Sean was 17, a time when he should have been playing softball with his friends, except he didn't have any friends, or working a part-time job as a stock boy or bagging groceries, except no one would hire him, and forget about a girlfriend that was never going to happen. He was casting about looking for something to do, a window to break, a bicycle tire to slash, or a child to torment. When he paused for a moment at the Halen's house, where their dog, a tender-hearted and trusting collie, frolicked in the yard. Sean went home for supplies and then came back for the dog. "Come here, boy," Sean called. "Come on, that's a good boy." And Sean Ryan led the Halen's collie, which was a girl, and a few blocks away to where 6 new houses were going up. Construction workers kept bankers' hours, and now, with the trees and blackberry bushes cleared away, there was no reason for anyone else to go there. The site was deserted. And Sean tied one end of a short rope to the dog's collar and the other end to the frame of one of the houses under construction. He left no leash room for the dog to roam. Sean Ryan was murdering his way up the food chain. My turtle was first Mrs. Fitzgerald's orange cat, which he choked to death and then hung from the mailbox on her front porch. And now he was going to kill the Halen's dog. From what would be the basement of the next house, but for now was just a big hole in the ground, Sean got busy. With Scotch tape, he attached an M80 to the firecracker on a flimsy stick that was the tail end of a bottle rocket. The M80, the size of a wine cork and encased in red cardboard, was not the quarter stick of dynamite that Sean believed it to be, but it did have more than enough explosive power to blow a dog to bits. The tail end of the bottle rocket went into an empty beer can like a long-stemmed red rose into a vase. The beer can was the launching pad, designed to stabilize the rocket so that it would follow its pre-planned course of flight from the trench to the target, which was the dog. All Sean needed to do was light both fuses and step back. The blast-off would be followed by a whistle, and then kaboom. Sean struck a match to one fuse and then to the other, but the weight of the M80 was more than the flimsy stick could support. The can tipped over, which was not supposed to happen, and Sean crouched down on one knee to upright the bottle rocket, and the M80 exploded and blew off the lower half of Sean Ryan's face. His jaw got separated from his neck, and he bled out. Perhaps it was naive of me, but I expected Darcy Halen's collie to be rewarded with chew toys. But no, you could have rowed a boat in all the tears shed, as if Sean Ryan had been a sweetheart, as opposed to a creeper freak that he was, a boy who would have grown up to be a rapist and after that a serial killer had he not accidentally killed himself before he got the chance to fulfill his dreams. "It's always, always a tragedy when someone dies young," my mother said, by way of partial explanation as to why death brings out the hypocrite in us all. It's as if with death comes instantaneous absolution. You die, and everyone forgets what is left in your wake. Like when my mother called to tell me that Uncle Nathan had died. just because Uncle Nathan's exploration of my not yet ready for primetime private parts did not damage me, did not mean, as far as I was concerned, that I had to be sorry he was dead. Good, I said. Sylvia, that's not nice. That's not nice? But let's assume for the moment that there is something to the coefficient of tragedy between the dead and the young, that indeed it would have been a tragedy had, as a young boy, Pol Pot choked on a chicken bone, or fallen down the well like Benny Hoople. Benny Hoople was from Nebraska or someplace, and he was not someone my mother knew, but his story, a boy falling down a well, made an impression on her, the tragedy of a child dying by misstep. But Uncle Nathan, drunk, child-molesting Uncle Nathan, 3-to-1 cirrhosis of the liver should have done him in, long before he did die. What killed him in the end was pneumonia, but better late than never. Underwhelmed with grief, I took a pass on the funeral. What will I say, my mother asked. What will I tell people if they ask why you're not there? How about the truth, I said. And that was the end of that conversation. The next one is very different, and it's from Hester Among the Ruins. And in that case, the protagonist, Hester, is a Jewish woman who goes to Germany to write a biography of sort of the German everyman post-war, and is having an affair with her subject, so it makes it a little complicated. Sorry. Uh-oh. Oh, here we go. Okay. Historians and biographers respond to their subjects, no matter dead or alive, with ardor, condemn, or praise. We judge. And as we go along, we become either their disciples or their detractors, or we fall deeply in love with them. So I got that one out of the way before I began, as opposed to further down the road. But to be in love is not the same as to be entirely stupid. And I must make clear, I do not have an agenda. I am not the child of Holocaust survivors. By the time the ovens were fired up, my parents were long and safely ensconced in New York. My mother even had some cousins and an uncle in California. Yes, there were other relatives who never made the crossing, and they died as a result of it, and that they might have had husbands and wives and children who were also murdered in that way, but I don't know for sure. As I scarcely speak to anyone of my parents seldom spoke of their lives before coming to America. All of Europe was referred to as the old country. My mother pronounced old country as if she was saying old shoe. My parents were isolationists, although the results of their immersion into the American culture were often comical, sometimes heart-wrenching, and especially during my teenage years, entirely mortifying to me. My father, a frizzy-haired, rumpled high school chemistry teacher, lost in the world, adrift in his own mind, experienced rapture in his Barker lounger, bopping his head and finger-snapping to the Delta blues on the hi-fi, which is what he called the stereo, a hi-fi. To the exclusion of all dining pleasure, we ate only what my mother deemed American food, Kellogg's sugar-frosted flakes, Campbell's soup, and rice-a-roni, a dish she truly believed was the haute cuisine of San Francisco. Despite the atrocious Norman Rockwell prints adorning nearly every room in the house, there were innumerable dead giveaways to expose my parents as un-Americans. The inability to master the backyard barbecue grill, which invariably gave off great clouds of black smoke and charred the hamburgers to ash. That I was forced to take violin lessons because, and I quote, "a girl who can play the violin will be very popular at the parties." My mother, with her poodle haircut, tight curls in the shape of a shower cap, never wore pants like the other mothers in the neighborhood. My father had one pair of blue jeans, an off-brand, which he ironed as if they were dress slacks, and there was no getting around the accent. Theirs was not an accent that could ever be heard as sophisticated like a British one or sexy like the Italian. Their accent begged for mockery. Somehow it never dawned on them in their bubble of happiness that they were outsiders, excluded from neighborhood fetes, even from informal gatherings for iced tea on summer nights. They were too old to be parents of an American girl my age, and granted, through no fault of their own, they made people uncomfortable. When both my parents had died, I was secretly more than a little bit relieved to be done with these little people who shrank as I diminished them, and such a secret was shameful too. And this is a very short piece. Valentine is the teenage girl in Brooklyn in the 1970s, and Lucille Fiacco is the school librarian. And they've become a little bit chummy. On the afternoon of the first night of Passover, while at the library, always a sight for wonder, Valentine stumbled upon an astounding discovery. Not an astounding discovery new to the world, but astounding and new to her. Valentine brought the book, the hefty tome of pictures of art, to Lucille Fiacco's desk and asked, "What's the story with this one?" Valentine had the book open to the print of the Circumcision by Francesco Mazzola. Lucille Fiacco wasn't familiar with that particular artist. All she knew was that she was staring at a picture of the pale blue light of the moon reflecting the halo over the head of baby Jesus with his weenie exposed. Exposed and about to go under the knife. 12 years with nuns did not prepare Lucille Fiacco for this picture. Both weenies in general and the circumcision of Jesus in particular were not areas the nuns would have touched with a 10-foot pole. But Lucille Fiacco reminded herself she had a master's degree in library science, she was an educated and enlightened person, and so she told Valentine, "So, it's a picture of baby Jesus getting circumcised." "Catholics get circumcised?" Valentine asked. Jesus wasn't a Catholic, Lucille explained, although admittedly it was not an easy thing for her to say. He was Jewish. The whole business of Jesus being born a Jew was a hot potato for the Catholics and for the Jews alike. The Jews simply didn't know what to make of it. Moreover, to bring the subject up was inviting trouble of some sort. Best to leave it alone. And for the Catholics, it was preferable to remain ignorant than to get mired in the conundrum of worshiping a Jewish man, of calling to his Hebrew mother in your time of needs. Better for all concerned to think of the common era as a time bubble, at least as far as religion was concerned, some years separate and adrift from the continuum of history. Better to think that for the 50 years before the birth of Christ and the 50 years after, nobody was anything, religiously speaking. Which was why it was perfectly plausible that Valentine would have had no idea that the Holy Family and her own family had that in common. Back then, everyone was Jewish, Lucille Fiacco said. There was no choice, which wasn't exactly accurate, but so what? And Mary, Valentine asked. Jewish, Lucille said. Joseph, too. I just told you, everybody was Jewish. Mary was Jewish? Yes, Mary was Jewish. The Blessed Virgin Mary was Jewish? Yes, Lucille snapped. The frigging Blessed Virgin Mary was Jewish. Are you satisfied? And these next little short pieces are sort of from this novel that's forever in progress, getting nowhere. And it's just 3 short pieces, and I said it's the heroine whose name is Bunny, who's not me. And these are just the pieces from childhood memories that go back that are not, well, they're applicable to the novel, but not entirely. The first one is, and they have little titles, all the sections have titles. This one is called Stuck in the Middle with You. Irma Bombach or Ann Landers, Dear Abby, Miss Manners, Garfield Snoopy, Madame Blavatsky, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, one of those purveyors of wisdom in a can, wrote whatever it was that Bunny's one of those purveyors of wisdom in a can, whoever wrote it, Bunny's mother clipped the column from the newspaper and left it on her bed as if it were a piece of foil-wrapped chocolate. It was not unusual for Bunny's mother to cut a column from the newspaper or an article of interest from Red Book magazine or Family Circle to leave on Bunny's bed. Not unusual, but never welcome. This one was titled The Middle Child, but it began to the firstborn, To the firstborn, I have always loved you best, because you were our first miracle. You were the genesis of a marriage, the fulfillment of young love, the promise of our infinity. Your baby book was an encyclopedia, illustrated and annotated. You had more clothes than a Barbie doll. To the middle child, I've always loved you best because you drew the dumb spot in the family, and it made you stronger for it. You cried less, had more patience, wore faded clothes, and never in your life did anything first, but it only made you more special. The world would not come to an end if you went to bed with dirty feet. To the baby, I've always loved you best because endings are generally sad, and you are such a joy. You are the one we held on to so tightly, for you see, you are the link with the past that gives reason to tomorrow. Bunny finished reading what might have been the truest thing ever written, and then went back to reread the part in which she was the main character. To the middle child, I've always loved you best because you drew the dumb spot in the family, and it made you stronger for it. You cried less, had more patience, wore faded clothes, and never in your life did anything first, but it only made you more special. Special. Bunny put quotation marks around the word, special. You drew the dumb spot in the family, and you never in your life did anything first. The world would not come to an end if you went to bed with dirty feet. I think that about covers it. Because she lives in France. To break from tradition is to insult what is sacred to others, to mock what they hold dear, to ruin it for everyone else, which you do because you are difficult and disagreeable, because you are a bunny and there is something very wrong with you. Everyone loves Thanksgiving, her father said. How could you not love Thanksgiving? Bunny said that there doesn't have to be a reason. Yes, there does have to be a reason. 1 day a year with my family, her father said. Is that too much to ask? Yes, Bunny said, it's too much to ask. Her father's family, 2 brothers, 1 sister, their respective spouses, nearly a dozen children between them, and last year there was the first grandchild who was a font of cheesy, stinking spit up, which didn't stop anyone from cooing all over the kid and congratulating the parents as if they'd actually done something worth a shit, like publish a book or win the lottery, until Bunny broke in and said, the earthworm is impressive because it impregnates itself. After that, everyone gave her the cold shoulder, except her cousin Natalie with the mouse ears. Circular ears set nearer to the top of her head than where you'd expect to find human ears, and they were pinker than normal. Ears you can only hope are genetically recessive. If she wants to stay home, her mother said, she can stay home. Alone, she added, as if alone were punishment, as if she'd come to be sorry about this decision soon enough. Bunny watched the car pull out of the driveway and down the road, and when it got to the vanishing point, she knew that she'd come to be sorry about this decision never. 3 slices of Kraft Swiss singles, tomato and mayonnaise on Arnold's bakery bread, a can of Diet Dr. Pepper, and a stack of Oreos. Bunny took her Thanksgiving dinner to the family room, where she sat on the floor in front of the TV, fuck the crumbs, to watch Miracle on 34th Street. By then, she must have seen Miracle on 34th Street, who knew how many times, minimum twice per holiday season, but still she was not prepared for how nearly unbearable it was for her to watch the movie to its very end, to that soul-sinking moment foreshadowing the never-ending ache of regret. Bunny despaired for the young Natalie Wood and then turned off the TV. Has everybody seen Miracle on 34th Street? The horrible thing is when she gets a house in the suburbs. Already it was dark out, the kitchen light glowed yellow, and Bunny caught sight of her reflection in the window, an opaque image. She contemplated giving herself the finger, but what would be the point of that? Instead, she took a box of cookies from the pantry, went to the living room where she cozied up in an armchair to read Peyton Place yet again. Peyton Place was one of the 6 books in their house, hardcover navy blue cloth-bound books her mother bought to fill a small shelf built into a corner table. Bunny had read the other 5 books a whole bunch of times, too. They stunk even worse than Peyton Place. The one about the cattle drive in the Old West, that one stunk the most. She popped a cookie whole into her mouth and opened the book at a random page. The sound of the motor as it turned off and that of the car doors as they opened, the satisfied clap as they shut, her parents, her sisters, the four of them, as if they came through the door in a cluster, were there in the foyer, her mother called it. Right, because we live in France, Bunny said. Unwinding scarves, unbuttoning coats, and done with that, Diana, the youngest of the three girls, practically ran to the living room where Bunny was sitting and all bouncy doing her own little dance, as if she really had to pee but was desperately trying to hold it in, except it wasn't pee she was trying to hold in, it was news. I swear to you, Diana said to her, the entire day, not one person asked where you were. It was like Bunny who? Around the table, without her, in a kind of Darwinian adaptation, her circle of extended family regenerated seamlessly, with the evolutionary benefit of additional elbow room, among other improvements throughout the day. All in all, this was Bunny's happiest Thanksgiving ever, even now, looking back in retrospect. The same as The Miracle on 34th Street, The Wizard of Oz was a movie ending that also ripped out Bunny's heart, the inevitability of Dorothy's life winding up as bleak and lonely as the Kansas Dust Bowl. When she was in the 8th grade, Bunny wrote a paper for school comparing the film version of The Wizard of Oz to the book version of The Diary of Anne Frank, positing that although the stories and circumstances were entirely different, both were tragedies that ended with a painfully naive optimism on the part of the protagonists. In her diary, Anne Frank wrote that she believed that despite everything, people are really good at heart. This from the girl who would, in a matter of days, be one of the many millions turned to smoke because Yoo-hoo, Anne, how about all those people who, despite everything, are really evil at heart? Dorothy gets a wish, and what does she wish for? Home. She wishes to go home. There's no place like home carries with it the promise that home is a place safe and warm, and not that miserable piece of scorched earth where the dyspeptic Miss Gulch snatched her dog to have him exterminated, to kill Toto, while Auntie fucking M just stood there with her thumb up her ass and let it happen. That was home, Dorothy, remember? But Dorothy clicked her heels as if the magic that would take her from Oz to Kansas would turn her home into the sort of home where everyone in the family wore reindeer sweaters during the holiday season. Under the big red F, circled 3 times, the teacher wrote, "There is something very wrong with you." And this last one is called, "Did You Have to Make Them Pigs?" And this is an apocryphal story, so I have no idea, that when George Orwell submitted Animal Farm to Faber and Faber, supposedly T.S. Eliot rejected it with a note that said, "Did you have to make them pigs?" So, it's a bad year no matter who you are. Acne, blackheads, facial hair, chest hair, pubic hair, underarm hair, breasts on parade, testicles dropping how? And the dank smell of it all. Sniff your underarms, take a whiff of your panties, socks, jock straps, and if you bleed through your tampon, stray dogs will follow you home. No one understands you, no one loves you, you have no friends, it's a wonder you don't kill yourself. And as if adolescence weren't already enough of a shitstorm of frogs, it was then, the year that she turned 14, when inexplicably and practically overnight, she packed on the pounds. There was Bunny, suddenly a roly-poly, jelly-belly tub of lard, 5 by 5 avoirdupois, fat, an anomaly, need I mention, in her ectomorphic clan. There was a popular TV show on back then, Sunday nights, a family favorite, of real-life stories with an Oliver Twistian sensibility, heartwarming, life-affirming, puke-inducing treacle. That week's episode was about a piglet, when rejected by the mother sow, was adopted by the border collie who took him in as one of her own. This took place on a farm in Scotland. The camera honed in on the piglet nursing along with the 4 puppies, 2 on either side, Piggy in the middle. Bunny's sisters shared a sidelong glance, and her mother said, "Dogs are such sweet animals." The film then cut to the puppies and Piglet at play, all of them delirious with joy, happiness unrestrained, happiness that can come only with being new to the world. That the Piglet was oblivious to his inability to keep up with the puppies, pigs can't dart and weave or crouch, paws down and ass in the air, rendered his efforts all the more adorable. It was too cute for words. To get up and bolt from the room would be to call attention to herself when what she wanted most then was to be invisible. To cry in front of them in and of itself was not an issue, not when minimum twice weekly she had a full-scale meltdown. What's one snivel more? What was at issue was the likelihood that her sudden departure would be misinterpreted as fat-related. Bunny is fat, pigs are fat, ergo Bunny is a pig. Except that wasn't it at all. But she knew all too well that any attempt to explain herself would have only widened the divide. If Bunny had said, "It's not the pig per se. The pig as a pig is irrelevant. It could have been a goat or a squirrel or whatever the fuck," to which her mother, after admonishing her for using the F word, would have said, "So what then are you crying about?" And Bunny would have said, "Go oink yourself. Go oink yourself." A retort for self-delight. She would have thought it was funny as all get out, and she would have been alone there too. What she did was this. She bit down on her lower lip to keep it from quivering, and like that, biting down hard on her lower lip, she sat out the minutes until the end of the show about the Piglet, unwittingly Chaplin-esque, who thought he was a dog right up until the very moment just before slaughter. At the same moment, border collies were on a grassy hill darting and weaving, herding the sheep to bring them home. Full disclosure, that last bit about the slaughter, that wasn't part of the television show. I tacked it on just now because that's how it really ended. Coda. As fast as Bunny gained the weight, snap, poof, just like that, the weight fell away. It happened, despite the plumper girls at school insisting there had to be an explanation. Grapefruit, amphetamines, juice fast, laxative, chronic barfing. No, but whatever it was, the pounds were lost for good, and in that way she was the same again as everyone else in her metabolically blessed family. Update. There was a disturbing difference between thin and too thin. A teacup could rest on her clavicle. Okay, that's it. So I don't really hate children. Or dogs.
I'm making it tall for you. Okay. Believe it or not, I found God. He's a poet, and he's here in this room. God comes from an island off the gray coast of Canada, an island named for a prince, made of sandstone cliffs and salt marshes. An island I have never been to, because it is an island that is very hard to reach. It is a long, long way by car. God is comfortable with the idea of nothing. He will be the first to tell you that nothing is something, and also not to trust his ideas or anyone else's for that matter. He might have had a father in prison. He might have married 3 times. He might have dated a Bond girl. God writes entire books about himself and somehow leaves the reader feeling it was about them or someone they know, or maybe just the universe. God has a very good sense of humor. God is so gorgeous that he is sometimes confused with Clint Eastwood. He once walked into an Armani store, asked for a discount, and got it. Still not sure if that's a joke or not. His work does not shy away from contradictions. He is not scared of love or beauty. Look at the world he's made. Everything turns blue at the twilight hour. Everything sacred even when it is not. He is consolation itself, writing in his poem Lines for Winter. If it happens that you cannot go on or turn back, and you find yourself where you will be at the end, tell yourself in that final flowing of cold through your limbs that you love what you are. Like all divine beings, He is so soothing to be near, so utterly wise about a world so often impaired by longing and loss that one is left wondering, if he consoles us, then who or what consoles him? The answer seems to be the act of creation itself. In his poem titled The Dress, he speaks as if to a young female poet about the idea of creation. If you step out of your dress and move into the shade, the mole will find you, so will the owl, and so will the poem, and you will fall into another darkness, one you will find yourself making and remaking until it is perfect. The thing about God is he cannot exist in one form. In any way, one form would never satisfy him. Last year he was overheard saying, "I haven't written a poem in years. Sometimes I draw little sketches. I'm done with poetry. I need a vacation. I want to crochet doilies." Now it is paper that brings him pleasure, small patches of color, the world boiled down into manageable squares no bigger than a heart. Intricate, muscular collages made of crushed, inlaid pulp. He has exhibited these collages in New York City and Shanghai, where in both places they sold out immediately. He has also been overheard saying, "If life were enough, we wouldn't make art." If you'd like to engage God in a meaningful conversation, ask him about the sublime. He will tell you that it is an experience for which there are no words, something which occurs outside of time in a realm beyond the imagination. The sublime is, in many ways, what his work is all about, the thing one reaches for without ever quite obtaining. In The Idea, he writes, "And there appeared, with its windows glowing, small in the distance, in the frozen reaches, a cabin. And we stood before it, amazed at its being there, and would have gone forward and opened the door and stepped into the glow and warmed ourselves there, but that it was ours by not being ours, and should remain empty. That was the idea." If you think he is connecting the idea of solitude with contentment, you might not be far off. In many of his landscapes, he is omnipotent, both there and not there, both beside you and absent, as if trying to prepare you, one page at a time, for his eventual departure, for the day when you will be left standing alone in the field where he stood. "The end of the world is only the end of the world as you know it," he writes. His collected works is out in the fall from Knopf. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Strand.
Thank you. That was a very beautiful introduction. Thank you. And that was a beautiful reading, Benny. That was great. Well, I worked hard earlier today trying to make a list of what I would read. And now I think I've got to change my mind. But I wanted to read I have a collected poems coming out, and many of these poems I hadn't read in years. And reading them again, I thought they were horrible, a lot of them. And then I read them again, they didn't seem too bad. And then I got to like some of them. After all, if I hadn't written those, I wouldn't have written the poems I think I like for a little while. Anyway, it's tough being God. This is one of my first poems, and it turns out it's a prose poem. I don't know what prose poems are, but in the privacy of the home, you want to get a good look at yourself. You stand before a mirror. You take off your jacket, unbutton your shirt, open your belt, unzip your fly. The outer clothing falls from you. You take off your shoes and socks, baring your feet. You remove your underwear. At a loss, you examine the mirror. There you are. You are not there. One of the poems I was going to read is a poem that Catherine quoted. I'll read the whole thing. It's not much longer than the quote. Problem with writing stuff down is I can't read my writing. So, anyway. I don't know. The dress. Lie down on the bright hill with the moon's hand on your cheek, your flesh deep in the white folds of your dress, and you will not hear the passionate mole extending the length of his darkness, or the owl arranging all of the night, which is his wisdom, or the poem filling your pillow with its blue feathers. But if you step out of your dress and move into the shade, the mole will find you, so will the owl, and so will the poem, and you will fall into another darkness, one you will find yourself making and remaking until it is perfect. My son, my son, my only son, the one I never had, would be a man today. He moves in the wind, fleshless, nameless. Sometimes he comes and leans his head, lighter than air, against my shoulder, and I ask him, son, where do you stay? Where do you hide? And he answers me with a cold breath. You never noticed, though I called and called and keep calling from a place beyond love, where nothing, everything wants to be born. Some of these I don't read very often, some I never read. This is, I don't think I've read this poem ever. It's simply beneath God. No, it's about a man, one of God's favorite subjects. Would get up at night, go to the mirror and ask, who's here? Would turn, sink to his knees, and stare at snow falling blameless in the night air. Would cry, heaven, look down, see, no one is here. Would take off his clothes and say, my flesh is a grave with nothing inside. Would lean to the mirror, you there, wake me, tell me none of what I've said is true. This is one of the night pieces I wrote. These are all very early poems. A fine, bright moon and thousands of stars. It is a still night, a very still night, and the stillness is everywhere. Not only is it a still night on deserted roads and hilltops where the dim, quilted countryside seems to doze as it fans out into clumps of trees, dark and unbending against the sky, with the gray dust of moonlight upon them. Not only is it a still night in backyards overgrown with weeds, and in woods, and by tracks where the rat sleeps under the garnet-crusted rock, and in the abandoned station that reeks of mildew and urine, and on the river where the oil slick rides the current, sparkling among islands and scattered weirs. Not only is it a still night where the river winds through marshes and mudflats fouled by bottles, tires, and rusty cans, and where it narrows through the sloping acres of higher ground covered with plots cleared and graded for building. Not only is it a still night wherever the river flows, where houses cluster in small towns, but farther down, where more and more bridges are reflected in it, where wharves, cranes, warehouses make it black and awful, where it turns from those creaking shapes and mingles with the sea. And not only is it a still night at sea, and on the pale glass of the beach, where the watcher stands upright in the mystery and motion of his life, and sees the silent ships move in from nowhere he has ever been, crossing the path of light that he believes runs only to him. But even in this stranger's wilderness of a city, it is a still night. Steeples and skyscrapers grow more ethereal. Rooftops crowded with towers and ducts lose their ugliness under the shining of the urban moon. Street noises are fewer and are softened, and footsteps on the sidewalks pass more quietly away. In this place, where the sound of sirens never ceases, and people move like a ghostly traffic from home to work and home, and the poor in their tenements speak to their gods, and the rich do not hear them. Every sound is merged this moonlit night into a distant humming, as if the city finally were singing itself to sleep. And this is for fiction writers out there. It's a poem called Fiction. Nobody's walking out. Fiction. I think of the innocent lives of people in novels who know they'll die, but not that the novel will end. How different from us, how different they are from us. Here the moon stares dumbly down through scattered clouds into the sleeping town, and the wind rounds up the fallen leaves, and somebody, namely me, deep in his chair, riffles the pages left, knowing there's not much time for the man and woman in the rented room, for the red light over the door, for the iris tossing its shadow against the wall. Not much time for the soldiers under the trees that line the river, for the wounded being hauled away to the cities of the interior, where they will stay. The war that raged for years will come to a close, and so will everything else except for a presence, hard to define, a trace, like the scent of grass after a night of rain, or the remains of a voice that lets us know without spelling it out, not to despair. If the end is come, it too will pass. Oh, I don't know why I wanted to read this, but I must have had a reason. I'll read it anyway. Even if I can't remember the reason. Actually, I didn't have a reason for reading any of these. I didn't even know why I say such things. From a lost diary. I had not begun the great journey I was to undertake. I did not feel like it. At breakfast I thought of writing to Goethe, but of course did not. I had not met him yet, so could not pretend to be on good terms with him. Would I sit for Rayburn? I turned it over a few times and chose not to. Why should I commit my looks on a particular day to the casual glances of history? I stared a long time at the green fields to the west of the house and watched with numb fascination the immobility of 2 spotted cows. Lunch was out of the question, and so was the letter to Wordsworth. I was sure he would not respond. Would I myself write a poem? I had never written one, but decided that nothing would be lost by postponing the experiment. There is so much not to do. Not to visit Blake or Crab Robinson. Not to write Corot and tell him about the cows. That's funny. Not to write Turner about my vision of the sun that like a red cry sank and smothered in rippling water until finally, far away, the water fell into the soundless chasms of an infinite night. What a relief. My mother, hunched over her needlework, urged me to write my sister, to whom I had nothing to say. In many instances, it is better and kinder to write nothing than not to write, said she, quoting someone or other. A day so much like the others, why do anything about it? Why even write this down were it not for my going on record as not having lived? After all, who can believe what is not written down? That I have withdrawn from the abuses of time means little or nothing. I am a place where things come together, then fly apart. Look at the fields disappearing. Look at the distant hills. Look at the night, the velvety, fragrant night, which has already come, though the sun continues to stand at my door. I'm going to read this will be a sort of deviation. 285. This is an old-fashioned ballad. It's tasteless, but I'll read it anyway. It's called The Couple. For the perverse, it could be considered a love story. For normal people like us, It's just a New York story. The scene is a Midtown station. The time is 3 a.m. Jane is alone on the platform, humming a requiem. She leans against the tiles. She rummages in her purse for something to ease a headache that just keeps getting worse. She went to a boring party and left without her date. Now she's alone on the platform, and the trains are running late. The subway station is empty, seedy, sinister, gray. Enter a well-dressed man, slowly heading Jane's way. The man comes up beside her. "Excuse me, my name is John. I hope I haven't disturbed you. If I have, then I'll be gone. I had a dream last night that I would meet somebody new. After 24 hours of waiting, I'm glad she turned out to be you. Oh, where are the winds of morning? Oh, where is love at first sight? A man comes out of nowhere. Maybe he's Mr. Right. How does one find the answer if one has waited so long? A man comes out of nowhere. He's probably Mr. Wrong." Jane imagines the future and almost loses heart. She sees herself as Europe and John as Bonaparte. They walk to the end of the platform. They stumble down to the tracks. They stand among the wrappers and empty cigarette packs. The wind blows through the tunnel. They listen to the sound. The way it growls and whistles holds them both spellbound. Jane stares into the dark. It's a wonder sex can be good when most of the time it comes down to whether one shouldn't or should. John looks down at his watch. I couldn't agree with you more. And often it raises the question, what are you saving it for? They kneel beside each other as if they were in a trance. Then Jane lifts up her dress and John pulls down his pants. Everyone knows what happens or what two people do when one is on top of the other, making a great to-do. The wind blows through the tunnel, trying to find the sky. Jane is breathing her hardest, and John begins to sigh. I'm a Princeton professor. God knows what drove me to this. I have a wife and family. I've known marital bliss. But things were turning humdrum, and I felt I was being false. Every night in our bedroom, I wished I were someplace else. What is the weather outside? What is the weather within that drives these two to excess and into the arms of sin? They are the children of Eros. They move, but not too fast. They want to extend their pleasure. They want the moment to last. Too bad they cannot hear us. Too bad we can't advise. Fate that brought them together has yet another surprise. Just as they reach the utmost peak of their endeavor, an empty downtown local separates them forever. An empty downtown local screams through the grimy air. A couple dies in the subway. Couples die everywhere. Well, it's just a change of tone. Oh, well, this is a little poem called The End. I don't know how long I've been reading. I think just go another several hours. The End. Not every man knows, well, no, this is wrong. It's now not everyone knows. In deference to women, I've changed it. Not everyone knows what he shall sing at the end, watching the pier as the ship sails away, or what it will seem like when he's held by the sea's roar, motionless, there at the end, or what he shall hope for once it is clear that he'll never go back, when the time is past to prune the rose or caress the cat, when the sunset torching the lawn and the full moon icing it down no longer appear. Not every man knows, not everyone knows what he'll discover instead, when the weight of the past leans against nothing, and the sky is no more than remembered light, and the stories of Cirrus and Cumulus come to a close, and all the birds are suspended in flight. Not everyone knows what is waiting for him, or what he shall sing when the ship he is on slips into darkness there at the end. Our masterpiece is the private life. I'm just skipping around. I mean, the order is, it's vaguely chronological. It is chronological, but I don't remember the years in which I wrote these things. I remember when the books came out, sort of. Not that it makes a hell of a lot of difference. It doesn't make any difference at all, actually. In 500 years, well, we won't exist, nor will our books. What a relief. Our masterpiece is the private life. 1, is there something down by the water keeping itself from us? Some shy event, some secret of the light that falls upon the deep, some source of sorrow that does not wish to be discovered yet? Why should we care? Doesn't desire cast its rainbows over the coarse porcelain of the world's skin, and with its measures fill the air? Why look for more? 2. And now, while the advocates of awfulness and sorrow push their dripping barge up and down the beach, let's eat our brill and sip this beautiful white bone. True, the light is artificial, and we are not well dressed. So what? We like it here. We like the bullocks in the field next door. We like the sound of wind passing over grass. The way you speak, in that low voice, our late night disclosures. Why live for anything else? Our masterpiece is the private life. 3. Standing on the quay between the roving swan and the star immaculate, breathing the night air as the moment of pleasure taken in pleasure vanishing seems to grow, its self-soiling beauty, which can only be what it was, sustaining itself a little longer in its going. I think of our own smooth passage through the grated partitions, the crises that bleed into the ordinary, leaving us a little more tired each time. a little more distant from the experiences which in the old days held us captive for hours. The drive along the winding road back to the house, the sea pounding against the cliffs, the glass of whiskey on the table, the open book, the questions, all the day's rewards waiting at the doors of sleep. I'm going to move a little quickly here. Getting a little tired of these poems. I'm moving on to God Speak. Here's a God poem I'm going to read. I hadn't thought of reading it, but I think God is happy he'd written this poem. The Rose. The sorrows of the rose were mounting up, twisted in a field of weeds. The helpless rose felt the breeze of paradise just once, then died. The children cried, "Oh, Rose, come back. We love you, Rose." Then someone said that soon they'd have another rose. Come, my darlings, down to the pond. Lean over the edge and look at yourselves looking up. Now do you see it? Its petals opening, rising to the surface, turning into you. Oh no, they said, we are what we are, nothing else. How perfect, how ancient, how past repair. And a little short poem, and then I'll read some of these prose pieces that I read here last year, to great acclaim. My name. Once, when the lawn was a golden green, and the marbled, moonlit trees rose like fresh memorials in the scented air, and the whole countryside pulsed with the chirr and murmur of insects, I lay in the grass, feeling the great distances open above me, and wondered what I would become and where I would find myself. And though I barely existed, I felt for an instant that the vast, star-clustered sky was mine, and I heard my name as if for the first time, heard it the way one hears the wind or the rain, but faint and far off, as though it belonged not to me, but to the silence from which it had come and to which it would go. Okay, now these poems from Almost Invisible are prose poems. Harmony in the Boudoir. After years of marriage, he stands at the foot of the bed and tells his wife that she will never know him, that for everything he says, there is more that he does not say, that behind each word he utters, there is another word, and hundreds more behind that one. All those unsaid words, he says, contain his true self, which has been betrayed by the superficial self before her. So you see, he says, kicking off his slippers, I am more than what I have led you to believe I am. Oh, you silly man, says his wife. Of course you are. I find that just thinking of you having so many selves receding into nothingness is very exciting. That you barely exist as you are couldn't please me more. My hand is shaking, not because I'm nervous. I'm never nervous. It's because I'm weak. Just weak. I haven't done any exercise in several years. Dream testicles, vanished vaginas. Horace the corpse said, I kept believing that tomorrow would come and I would get up, put on my socks, my boxer shorts, go to the kitchen, make myself coffee, read the paper, and call some friends. But tomorrow came, and I was not in it. Instead, I found myself on a powder blue sofa in a field of bright grass that rolled on forever. How awful, said Mildred, who was not yet a corpse, but in close touch with Horace. How awful to be so far away with nothing to do and without sex to distract you. I've heard that all vaginas up there, even the most open, honest, and energetic, are shut down, and that all testicles, even the most forthright and gifted, swing dreamily among the clouds like little chandeliers. The mysterious arrival of an unusual letter. It had been a long day at work and a long ride back to the small apartment where I lived. When I got there, I flicked on the light and saw on the table an envelope with my name on it. Where was the clock? Where was the calendar? The handwriting was my father's, but he had been dead for 40 years. As one might, I began to think that maybe, just maybe, he was alive, living a secret life somewhere nearby. How else to explain the envelope? To steady myself, I sat down, opened it, and pulled out the letter. Dear son, was the way it began. Dear son, and then nothing. Poem of the Spanish poet. In a hotel room somewhere in Iowa, an American poet, tired of his poems, tired of being an American poet, leans back in his chair and imagines he is a Spanish poet, an old Spanish poet, nearing the end of his life, who walks to the Guadalquivir and watches the ships, gray and ghostly in the twilight, slip downstream. The little waves approaching the grassy bank where he sits whisper something he can't quite hear as they curl and fall. Now, what does the Spanish poet do? He reaches into his pocket, pulls out a notebook, and writes, Black fly, black fly, why have you come? Is it my shirt, my new white shirt with buttons of bone? Is it my suit, my dark blue suit? Is it because I lie here alone under a willow cold as stone? Black fly, how good you are to come to me now. How good you are to visit me here. Black fly, to wish me goodbye. I'm skipping along here. Once upon a cold November morning, just a few more and then I'm gone. I left the sunlit fields of my daily life and went down into the hollow mountain, and there I discovered, in all its chilly glory, the glass castle of my other life. I could see right through it and beyond, but what could I do with it? It was perfect, irreducible, and worthless, except for the fact that it existed. Provisional eternity. A man and a woman lay in bed. Just one more time, said the man. Just one more time. Why do you keep saying that, said the woman. Because I never want it to end, said the man. What don't you want to end, said the woman. This, said the man, this never wanting it to end. Two more. Why can't I find? Oh, God, I've gone to all the trouble of writing down the page numbers and I'm completely ignoring. Of course, I can't read what these numbers say. I think I miswrote the numbers. Oh, here we are. Those little legs and awful hands. Night had fallen. A man who was staying at the Grand Hotel walked to the beach, lit a cigar, opened a black umbrella, and leaned back in a canvas beach chair, holding the cigar in one hand and the umbrella in the other. I wanted to ask him, why the umbrella? But I was too timid. Then I heard him say, those little legs and awful hands, will I never be rid of them? I patted my legs, then looked at my hands and knew that he had not meant me, and certainly not himself, but maybe another, someone he might have hated or even loved. But down the beach, a woman wearing very large mittens was coming towards him rapidly with baby steps. He jumped up from the beach chair, tossed his cigar, and with his umbrella began to run. He ran and ran, trying to escape, as if he could ever escape. This is the last one. That's my fave. Anyway, this is the last one I'll read. Oh, there's a clock up, but it doesn't tell the time. I thought, weird. Nocturne of the Poet Who Loved the Moon. I've grown tired of the moon, tired of its look of astonishment, the blue ice of its gaze, its arrivals and departures, of the way it gathers lovers and loners under its invisible wings, failing to distinguish between them. I've grown tired of so much that used to entrance me, tired of watching cloud shadows pass over sunlit grass, of seeing swans glide back and forth across the lake, of peering into the dark, hoping to find an image of a self as yet unborn. Let plainness enter the eye, plainness like a table on which nothing is set, like a table that is not yet even a table. Thank you.